Hi, everybody. Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Hope you're doing well. Well, we've had the second of what seems like an infinite series of dominoes leading the Republicans and the Democrats to choose their virtual democracy cage fight matches against each other. First in Iowa last week, won by Ted Cruz, and just by a hair on her chinny chin chin, Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. And now we've just had New Hampshire won by, I guess, more than twice the vote of the next contender, Kasich, Donald Trump. So the first thing that I was sort of thinking about with regards to this horse race is that Trump won, of course, in New Hampshire. He spent about $500,000 of his own money. Bush came in fourth. Was it fourth, Mike?
Yeah, he came in fourth. It broke down Trump first, then Kasich, a distant second, and then Cruz, an even more distant third, and then Jeb Bush. Cruz just beat out Jeb Bush by a hair. I think it was 0.7%. So if you're coming that close to Bush, that's not a great sign, but yeah.
And I'm going to assume that out of Christian goodwill and forgiveness, it was Ben Carson who donated the votes to Ted Cruz to help him just get over that hump. But Bush spent 30. So Trump gets first place by like a very, very wide margin. He spent $500,000 of his own money. Bush at fourth place spent $36 million of other people's money. And if that isn't an example of the benefit of private versus public, I simply don't know what is.
Oh, well, you have to look at this, too. The actual breakdown per vote. In Iowa, Jeb paid $2,800 per vote.
Can't buy me love.
In New Hampshire, it wasn't quite as bad. It was only $1,200 per vote. But Jeb Bush's entire candidacy is, I just find it to be hilariously entertaining. And the biggest thing to come out of New Hampshire is the fact that the political establishment is currently engulfed in flames with the rise of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump overtaking the entire atmosphere in the Republican convention. So.
Well, I think that Jeb Bush's basic philosophy is to look at America as a gold-digging whore. And the idea basically is that I can replace charisma with money. Like, I'm not handsome, I'm not charismatic, but I'm exceedingly rich and will spend a lot of money on you. I think it's the husband of the Anna Nicole Smith approach to marriage. That's the only thing I can think of because, man, he is just doing dismally all around.
Well, see, that seems to be working a whole lot better for Bernie Sanders, who's just offering to absolve student debts and replacing charisma with offering to give free stuff to people. But yeah, it's not working so well on the Republican side of things.
Now, the other thing I thought was fascinating was, boy, I mean, the media bias has been around forever, but it's just fascinating to see when people don't play by the media's rules, just how ridiculous the bias and how obvious the bias becomes. And we'll talk about the Huffington Post in a second. So the establishment media kept saying to Donald Trump, how does it feel to have lost in Iowa? Is this a bad loss for you in Iowa? You lost in Iowa. And, he kept saying, look, I came in second. I wasn't even a politician until 7 months ago, and I came in second. That's not really that much of a loss. And by the way, Ted Cruz seems to have gotten in by taking, let's say, somewhat surreptitiously, a whole bunch of Ben Carson's votes. So they called Donald Trump a loser for getting in second place in Iowa. Now, how do you think they referred to the second place winner in New Hampshire, the establishment-based Kasich? Did they call him a loser?
I'm going to guess not nearly as much.
And you would be entirely correct in that. Stunning breakthrough by Kasich. He's within a hair's breadth of conquering the known universe. He can walk backwards through time. Gold. He snorts it when he sneezes into his handkerchief. It was just amazing. Trump's a loser for coming in second because he's non-establishment. Kasich is a total hero and triumphant winner for coming in second. I mean,
well, remember this in Iowa too. Rubio, who came in third, was a huge winner. Trump second, loser, and this time Rubio, I think, came in fifth. I'm not sure if the media's weighed in if he's a winner or not for this, for coming in fifth, but his campaign seems to be imploding as we currently speak.
Did you? So I was looking at some comments, and
oh dear,
somebody posted a link to the Huffington Post. Oh, Huffington Post, how whimsical thou art. And I thought it was a satire. Like, literally, I thought it was a satire, the world becoming the onion in its inexorable way. And what happened was, on the Huffington Post, in giant red, 82-point, I can't see a thing in my optometrist font style, New Hampshire goes racist, sexist, homophobic. That was their coverage impartial, unbiased coverage of the election. I'm like, that's got to be a fake. That can't be real. So I went to Huffington Post, and it was. New Hampshire goes racist, sexist, homophobic, big flaming demon text right there in the middle of the page. Now, to be fair, I think somebody recognized that might be giving the game away a little bit, might be a smidgen of an overreach. And I think about 20 minutes later, it had been replaced by something slightly toned down, in the same way that first-degree murder can be slightly toned down to manslaughter. But that was what the Huffington Post, just absolutely astonishing. And I hope that is just one more nail in the coffin of that leftist love fest.
Oh, the biggest thing to come out of this entire campaign season, as a principled non-voting anarchist on average for me, is just watching the destruction of the political establishment and be the destruction of the media and people continuing to shoot themselves in the foot across the political spectrum. You have Republicans, you have Democrats, and you have libertarians and people of all different persuasions just continuing to destroy their credibility in rapid fashion. And there's so much evidence in at this point that if you don't understand why people like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are capturing popularity in the American political field versus the establishment candidates, you really don't deserve to be putting pen to paper and writing anything at this point.
Oh, the degree to which the average small government Republicans loathe with a cold, resonating, chilblain anger the Republican establishment. It's one thing to be betrayed by your enemies, and that you kind of expect. The fact that the Democrats are going for bigger government all the time and are constantly race baiting and class baiting and gender baiting. You kind of accept that. It's the et tu, Brute backstab of the people who claim to be your friends that really burns, and that is what is driving, I think, the motivation for both Bernie Sanders and for Trump. And
you just had Mitch McConnell come out and say they're not going to oppose any of Obama's policy agendas moving forward because they don't want it to interfere with the campaign, because it might be brought up in a negative connotation that they're opposing something that Obama wants between now and the general election. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, but I can't imagine why people hate the establishment Republicans these days.
All right, let's dip into the eminent domain thing.
Oh, there's a lot to say on the eminent domain thing. Have you seen the brand new Ted Cruz commercial on Eminent Domain?
Not.
Oh, it's delightful. It's delightful. I'll explain it to you real quick. It's got a bunch of kids playing with what looks like a Donald Trump action figure and a Hillary Clinton action figure. And the kids start bashing a play dollhouse apart with the Donald Trump action figure, talking about how, Trump favors eminent domain and likes bulldozing grandmothers' houses for limousine parking lots. And then the parents come in and they're like, ooh, we don't like these values that our kids are showing. And this is amusing. The whole eminent domain thing is just hysterical because, of course, everyone's ragging on Trump about eminent domain. If people have a problem with violations of property rights, taxation falls into that category, and all the politicians, all the political candidates currently support taxation. So, from a principled standpoint, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, of course, all these Republican candidates have previously supported eminent domain. Clips from Ted Cruz supporting eminent domain have come out recently. Jeb Bush, clips have come out with him supporting eminent domain. Of course, his father supporting eminent domain. And everyone wants the Keystone Pipeline on the Republican side. How are they going to pay for that? How are they going to get that done? Eminent domain. All the people that are copying Donald Trump's policy of wanting to build a wall on the southern United States border. How are they going to build the wall? Eminent domain. They're going to need to take the land through eminent domain in order to build a wall. So the eminent domain issue just continues to be amusing to me because there seems to be no consistency or attempt to make any kind of sense across the political spectrum on the subject.
Well, eminent domain is one of the it's just the red it's the red rag in front of the bull, because eminent domain is one of these things that libertarians and small government Republicans eminent domain and it's just one of these things that just makes people go kind of crazy and not put things in perspective. So, my sort of Pascal's wager or my wager for people is to say, okay, if you could be free of one thing and one thing only, and you could choose between being subject to eminent domain or being taxed, which would you choose? Because taxation is going to happen 100% of the time, even while you're sleeping. And taxation is a form of eminent domain because if you don't pay your property taxes, your property will be taken away. So property taxes and taxes as a whole, that's the real violation of property rights. And if you could choose to be free of one, Mike, let's just say no taxes ever again in the future, but you'll be subject to eminent domain, or freedom from the risk of eminent domain, but paying taxes forever, what would you choose?
I have a tougher time deciding between mass Muslim immigration and eminent domain, personally. I mean, beheading versus possibly having my property taken from me, even though my property's already being taken from me through further force. God, I don't know. Tough one.
Well, and wasn't Jeb Bush talking that it was, because he said, well, eminent domain for private profit is really bad, but he's for the Keystone Pipeline, as far as I understand it. And then Donald Trump pointed out that the Keystone Pipeline is for private profit, and he said, no, it's a public partnership. It's all public and so on. And that's not even remotely close. That's an example of just winning in the moment, saying anything to kick up dust, win in the moment, and then being slowly pulled apart, like a dead swimmer by feeding frenzy sharks in the blogosphere after the fact, because it is largely private profits that are driving the Keystone Pipeline.
I'm embarrassed to admit how much I enjoy the Donald Trump-Jeb Bush interactions in the debates. I actually watched a compilation of the highlights over the course of the last several debates, and I love Jeb Bush. I really do. I love watching Jeb Bush completely ineffectually attempt to attack Donald Trump in every debate and continue to get, his head stuffed in the toilet bowl and get him locked in his locker throughout the entire proceeding.
It is. It's like watching my accountant go up against the Incredible Hulk. I'm not happy that I like watching it. I just can't deny that I do. I mean, it's just one of these things that and the other thing too, as far as eminent domain goes, is that the Bush family has been part ownerships of some football team, I think, who used eminent domain to build their stadium, which largely profits the largely tax exempt NFL. So it just seems like you're a little bit on shaky ground, Dr. Bush, or Mr. Bush rather, for pointing out eminent domain abuses, because Donald Trump didn't actually end up being able to take this woman's house. She fought him in court. He dropped it, and he was willing to offer her many times the value of the house. The house, I think he said it would be, even the 90s, the house that he wanted to take. He said, I'd be willing to go to $5 million to take it away. And it ended up being sold for $500,000 a year or two ago. So it would have been
another one of those weird things where the propaganda has completely eclipsed the reality of the situation. Now he's taken the house, he's bulldozed the house, even though that never happened. And yes, there was a court battle, and yes, it's not particularly great. I don't particularly think eminent domain is wonderful or anything. But on the grand scale of priorities and things to be concerned about in my immediate future, eminent domain doesn't make the top 100 list, personally. So,
Right. Now, the degree of hatred that a lot of Republicans have for the existing Republican establishment, I think, cannot be
orders of magnitude. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, it is horrendous. They actually, a lot of them really dislike the Bush tax cuts, because the Bush tax cuts actually got rid of a lot of low-income taxes. And that made, of course, a big problem, because you will generally not oppose tax increases if you're not paying taxes. It's one of these basic realities of democracy. The Bush tax cuts, they removed tax liability from the bottom 20 to 40% of the population, the income population, completely, like no taxes. So now almost half of tax filers pay zero federal income tax. And that's kind of a problem, because it divided the country into two: those who pay federal income taxes and those who don't. And of course, those who don't are now fertile ground for voting left. And they consider that to be kind of a big problem. And these kinds of subtleties for people who don't follow this stuff generally get kind of missed, right? I mean, the GOP had full control of the White House and Congress. Did they secure the borders? They did not. Did they balance the budget when they had White House and the Congress controlled? No. They can't even get a budget written at the moment. They can't, with the full control of the House and Senate, they can't pass the fiscal year 2016 budget. And it's just amazing. Who eliminated the debt ceiling, which was one of the leverages that was able to be used to control spending from Obama? GOP didn't just raise it. To hell with raising it. They just eliminated it completely.
Not even like they put up a fight. And that's what people are upset about. It's just like, fine. Here's the omnibus spending bill. Paul Ryan, who was put in place, to fight against this stuff, and first thing he does when he gets in there is sign a deal that every Republican, except for those currently drawing a check from the federal government, currently hates. So, way to go, Paul Ryan. No surprise.
Yeah. GOP handed the TSA to the American people, the Patriot Act to the American people. And of course, under Bush, they expanded Medicare to include prescription drug coverage, particularly for the elderly. And there was a precursor to Common Core, which is loathed by just about everyone except teachers' unions, called Race to the Top. And that was the GOP. And this is just one of many, many problems that the Republicans, the voting Republicans, have with the existing Republican Party. There's no faith. I think, as we've talked about before, the GOP worked strongly against Rand Paul and against Ted Cruz and against, they even worked very hard against Ronald Reagan way back in the day. And currently they're working very hard to undermine Donald Trump. So these are politicians extremely popular with the rank and file, and they follow these politicians and they see the GOP party machinery in Washington working actively against people that they really like and respect. And again, there's no, in order to truly hate something, you have to love it first and then be viciously betrayed. And I think that third column coming into the GOP. I think for them it's like, oh, we have this lovely civilized Roman system set up, and I do believe there is a rather stinky barbarians coming across the gates. And I think that they really just have lost the core base of Republican voters, and they just want to smash the party machinery, and Donald Trump is the wrecking ball to do that.
Well, and the only reason that Donald Trump is in a position to do that is because he's not beholden to corporate interest and donors, so he can bring up these issues which are not popular amongst the donor class, as evidenced by the last Republican debate where the entire donor class in the audience proceeded to boo Donald Trump vociferously for bringing up issues.
Booing Donald Trump. I mean, this is, again, things that I didn't know about. I don't know who the heck. I mean, things that I thought I'd never know about in my life is who sits in the audience at these primaries. For all of this. For the debates. Who sits in the audience for the debates? I don't know. I just, who picks up an iPhone? People who've been camping for 3 weeks. I don't know. And the fact is, when he was pushing back against Jeb Bush, there was this big resounding set of boos. Now, Jeb Bush was polling in the low or middle single digits at the time. And I was like, well, that seemed like a lot of boos, given how few people support the guy. And then Donald Trump points out, he says, look, we tried to get tickets for our people, but they said, no, the tickets are all going out to donors and all of that. So these are all of the corporate and political interest groups that are funding the campaigns who get into the audience. And I thought, wow, that really does skew the response of the crowd. And the fact that he pointed it out, again, never thought I'd ever know anything like that, but I really respect Donald Trump for pointing that out and just reminding everyone how stacked the deck is against outsiders or people who aren't taking this kind of money.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I was looking into possibly getting tickets for one of the early debates just because, it's a big cultural movement that's going on. Interested to see it firsthand. And getting tickets was next to impossible. I think this was a Colorado debate. And you think, 20-plus million people watching some of these debates live on television, they could probably very easily sell out an arena or a stadium for this type of thing. And man, wouldn't that be just a wonderful thing to show people? For those that believe in democracy and believe in the political process, to show that many people engaged and interested showing up to watch people talk about the issues and everything, wouldn't that be wonderful? But instead, no, they get these small venues where they cram people together and they don't sell tickets and don't make it publicly accessible. And the question is why? And I think we find out why when stuff like the last debate happens where Donald Trump is getting booed for bringing up stuff that goes against the political establishment. Oh, well, if you let in the general populace, the unwashed masses, you're not going to be able to control the narrative nearly as well if you just bring in people that, are willing to attend the 10,000 a plate dinners and support political action committees. So, yeah, why aren't they letting the general unwashed masses into debates and that type of thing? Well, because they don't want reactions unlike those that you may see at Donald Trump rallies.
There's only one way the cow gets invited to dinner, Mike, and it's not very pretty. Does not get a seat at the table, gets a squishy bit on the plate, usually underdone. Now, I'd like to talk just a smidge about Ted Cruz, CNN, and Dr. Ben Carson. Oh,
there's a lot to discuss there.
Why don't you start? You've read a bit more about this than I have. But
have you heard that Ted Cruz is the most consistent conservative, Steph? Have you heard that? Has that been beaten into your skull repeatedly, nonstop? Have you seen a propaganda poster, advertising campaign? Consistent conservative, consistent conservative. Did you know that?
Do you know what his real name is?
Rafael Cruz?
Rafael Cruz.
Yeah,
I feel culturally appropriated from. I feel that he's wasped up his name from what? It's Rafael Edward Cruz, and now he goes by Ted. That's like me going by Baz, because my middle name is Basil, which would probably be appropriation from Iran. But anyway, so yes, I have heard that he is very much a consistent conservative, an honorable, decent, God-fearing man whose daughter continually squirms to get away from his embrace because he's a spanker. But anyway, okay, so go on.
Oh, yeah, if you haven't seen that video, folks, Ted Cruz trying
this.
to kiss his daughter on the campaign trail, it's, oh, God, it's revolting.
She's like, no, ow, ow, and she's just squirming away from him, and it's like, oh.
If his daughter was 18, she'd probably be voting for Trump.
Probably be dating Trump. But anyway. Okay, so for those who don't know, there was a bit of a kerfuffle in Iowa that may have actually swung the election against what the polls were saying. So do you want to give us a smidge of a backstory there?
Yeah, well, there was a couple things that happened in Iowa regarding Ted Cruz that people were upset about. The first was a mailer he sent out to people, very targeted to people, try and drive the vote, to get people out to vote, specifically people that were likely to vote for him. And he sent out this form that very much looked like an official government document saying voter violation, and actually showed the neighbors, had the names of people's neighbors, and gave them a grade on their voting, I guess, for their voting participation. And this type of thing has been done before. Barack Obama actually did it in the last general election to drive the vote. And it works as far as getting people out to vote, but it also works as far as pissing people off. And he succeeded in doing that pretty strongly, including having some people from the Iowa political establishment come out and condemn what he did there. So Ted Cruz was going for broke. He spent a lot of money in New Hampshire. A lot of money in Iowa. And if he didn't show well in Iowa, it was not going to be good for Ted Cruz's campaign. So he pulled out that stop. And they also pulled out the stop of using a pretty innocent story from CNN where they said Ben Carson, immediately after the Iowa primary, was going to take and go back home and get a fresh change of clothes and then resume campaigning. And Ted Cruz's campaign people sent out letters to people at the precincts for the caucus process saying that Ben Carson is dropping out of the race and to tell
Not
people,
letters, right? It was pretty immediate, right?
Yeah, it was pretty immediate.
Like emails,
there's
texts, that kind of
voicemails
thing,
that are available. There was tweets that went out. And this is going to the people that are representing the Ted Cruz campaign directly at the caucus locations, and they're telling people that Ben Carson is dropping out of the race, and they should caucus for Ted Cruz. And oddly enough, Karl Rove actually did something about this. Karl Rove, not a friend of Donald Trump, not a friend of anyone that is sane.
And if Karl Rove is your voice of conscience, you are not in a merry place.
Yeah, this is a quote from Karl Rove about this situation. He said, "They sent us to nearly 1,500 precinct captains. There are 150 precincts in the state, and they also sent this message to Spence Roberts. Now, why does this matter? Now, the gap between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz was 6,239 votes. There's the 1,500 precincts. If you do the math, that message cost Carson 4 votes per precinct to switch to Cruz. Then Cruz beats Trump. So if that message cost Carson 4 votes per precinct, and those votes switch to Cruz, then Cruz beats Trump in Iowa. So it doesn't take a whole lot to swing the entire election. And
of course, if you're dedicated to voting for Dr. Carson, and then some guy comes up and says, "Did you hear Dr. Carson is dropping out of the race? There's no point voting for him." You're going to switch to someone. And of course, if it's the Ted Cruz guy saying, then he's going to get a chance by delivering that message to give you a quick pitch for Ted Cruz and all that kind of stuff. And of course, if you were for Trump, then you probably would have been already going to vote for Trump. If you were going to vote for Ben Carson, then your next most likely person to vote for is another fairly establishment candidate like Ted Cruz. So I think that they targeted the Carson voters, but with this erroneous false story that he was dropping out of the race, knowing that the votes were going to accumulate to them, not to Donald Trump.
Well, Carson has a lot of strong evangelical support. And although Trump has had some strong evangelical support as well, Ted Cruz does do very well in that demo. So it's just another in a long line of very interesting decisions by the Cruz campaign, which certainly don't paint them in the most positive of lights when looked at from any objective standpoint.
Well, and just to put this in perspective, though, I used to, of course, do a lot of co-founded a software company, did a lot of sales. And, the one thing I learned very early on is you don't diss your competitors, just be honest about their strengths and weaknesses and why you think your solution is better. Now, if I read somewhere that, let's say we were up for some $1 million contract and it was us and some other company, and I read that the CEO of that company was going to take a couple of days off, and then I translated that and went to the clients and said, listen, this company's going out of business. They are going out of business. They're out of cash. They're facing bankruptcy, and it's going to be filed in the next couple of days. That would be such an egregious falsehood. Like, it's an absolutely horrible way to do business. That would be such an egregious falsehood. Like, if word got out, my career would be done. Done. Nobody would ever trust me again. I would never make another sale that I can think of. I would be fired. I don't know what else might happen. But that would be such an egregious falsehood to plant in a client's ear that it would be inconceivable to do that. But apparently, software sales kind of cutthroat, but it's nothing close to what's going on. The fact that someone can have a career after doing something like this, or I don't know whether he was consulted or not, doesn't really matter. I mean, the buck stops at the head of the campaign, which is the candidate. How can someone have a career after that? It's just astounding. It just shows how lax any kind of ethical standards are in the political arena.
Well, even in the aftermath, Cruz has tried to blame CNN for reporting this story, even despite the fact that they never reported that Carson was dropping out of the race. And there was a series of tweets and also an on-air conversation about Carson going back home instead of immediately resuming his campaign. And at no point in there did it say that Carson was dropping out. And even at some point, in the tweets, the series of tweets, I think it went out like a minute later, they even said that Carson was resuming for the prayer breakfast in, I believe, want to say Washington, D.C. That might not be correct. But, so there was, it's not like CNN put out a false story and then the wheels were in motion. It didn't get corrected until later. This was just a complete fabrication by the Cruz campaign, political opportunism, which, not too surprising in politics. It's a dirty business. But the fact that it was perpetrated against Carson, Carson's one of the few people that hasn't gone negative. And there's a lot of things about Carson you can say, but he seems to be generally well-liked. Just like, this is a nice, decent man who's trying to do what he thinks is best, whether you agree with it or not, in the campaign or not. And, the fact that he did it to Carson, it's, if he did it to Trump or Jeb Bush or someone else, it's like, okay, everyone throws fire. That happens. But the fact that it happened to Carson is a little low. And also, the idea that Carson would drop out on the day of the Iowa caucuses, in and of itself, is absolutely like, I'm going to make my decision to drop out 15 minutes before the Iowa caucus, where I put in all this time. And he actually had one of his campaign volunteers die campaigning in Iowa.
Actually, when you say he had one of his campaign volunteers die, that sounds a bit sinister. The guy had suggested something unethical, so Carson was under his van cutting the brakes. No, it was they drove and
icy road, van flipped, and a couple injuries, and one of his campaign volunteers actually died. And so the idea, and Carson brought this up in the debate, the idea that he would suspend his campaign the day of the caucus, with all the work that went into it, including the sacrifices that were made, the ultimate sacrifice by someone that was supporting him, I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. And the fact they'd run with that story, despite a lack of any and all evidence, was just sincere political opportunism at its absolute worst. And then it's not even like this was admitted or owned up, or, it was some underling that did this, and Ted Cruz fired him the next day and said this is unacceptable. To what I know, no one has been fired. No one has taken outright accountability for this. Ted Cruz continues to obfuscate the timeline of what happened and continues to blame CNN, despite the fact CNN never reported this. And there's detailed timelines online if people are interested in looking into this more. But yeah, it's politics as usual from the consistent conservative.
Well, to be fair though, Mike, Raphael did send out corrections after the polls had closed. Like how you can apply CPR to somebody 4 days dead and call yourself a doctor. So that is, we just want to give the full rounded out story. The thing that astonishes me too is, and I shouldn't be astonished. I seem to have this perpetual ability to be astonished by gravity. But where are the Black Lives Matter people when it comes to a guy named Ted potentially having lied to steal an election from a black man. I mean, imagine if a guy named Ted had done that to Barack Obama. They would be going mental. You've taken away the black man's voice. You have lied about this guy who, you said he's dropping out when he just pulled in, $23 million over the last quarter. You disenfranchised this black guy who's a forerunner in a presidential race. And I didn't hear any protests from the left because, of course, you're only black if you're on the left. Otherwise, I don't know, what are you, an Oreo, an Uncle Tom, a sellout, whatever it is, right? But it just goes to show that the Black Lives Matter is only lefty Black Lives Matter, criminal Black Lives Matter, welfare-dependent Black Lives Matter, people who vote Democrat Black Lives Matter. But Dr. Ben Carson, who last time I checked was a little on the darker shade of pale, his disenfranchisement in this process hasn't seemed to matter at all to black activists anywhere.
Yep, and the same thing applies to women. You can look at all the wonderful things that Sarah Palin was called after she endorsed Donald Trump, all the heat that people like Phyllis Schlafly and Ann Coulter, and you can throw Ayn Rand in there as well. If you're a woman and you're on the right, you're not an out-and-out lefty, you're going to be attacked with everything under the sun, and the typical rules of don't say that about a black man, don't say that about a woman, certainly don't apply to the leftist media.
Feminism is just socialism in granny panties. But this was also quite astonishing as well because Madeleine Albright, look her up. Anyway, I don't give my opinion of her. But she was saying recently that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And by that, she meant vote left for Hillary Clinton. And so that, to me, is quite an astonishing thing. When you look at the degree to which everyone says, well, Hispanics don't like Donald Trump because of his stance on immigration, even though that's actually not true. A lot of Hispanics don't want to see low-rent Hispanics following them over the border. They kind of move to get away from Mexico. They don't want Mexico following them. But the idea that Hispanics are all this one voter bloc, they're all going to vote, and Muslims are all going to vote this way, and don't annoy them because they're just one giant brain with, one single brain with a whole bunch of hands, that this in-group preference for the Hispanics, for the Muslims, that the gays are going to vote this way, that the women must vote for the woman, although I don't believe Carly Fiorina was mentioned much in that because, of course, she's not a lefty. But this idea that there's this significant in-group preference for every group except, in general, white males, I think is an important lesson to be learned because she said, you got to support women. Women have to support women. In other words, you just, vote for the closest vagina on a podium. That's if there's a vagina on the podium, you kneel. But that is your mecca. That vagina on the podium, that's all it should be. Just one big, labia flag floating above a podium, and you vote for that, unless it's Carly Fiorina, in which case you're going to eviscerate her. So that kind of in-group preference, to me, I think is really, really important. At the same time, they say never judge a group collectively. I mean, that to me is astonishing. Well, you can't offend the Hispanics because all Hispanics are for a path to citizenship. All Hispanics want the border to be left open. All Hispanics are in favor of sanctuary cities, which is not true, but this is what they say. But at the same time, you can never, ever judge Hispanics collectively. It's like, what? Aren't you just making the case that prejudice makes perfect sense because all Hispanics and all women either do or should think the same? So how on earth can we not judge people collectively when this entire label is being circled around and everyone's being squished into it?
Donald Trump comes out and says that some Mexican illegal immigrants are rapists. Yes, he said that. And now all Hispanics are rapists. And, that collectivization is immediately extrapolated. And, it's
well, what are these numbers you dug up on these remittances? Because that is really quite astonishing that remittances are now like remittances, which is what the legal and illegal immigrants to the U.S. send back home to Mexico, that the remittances, money flowing into Mexico from Americans, from Mexican Americans or just Mexican illegals, that the money flowing into Mexico exceeds the Mexican government's revenue from its oil exports. Was that correct?
Yeah, this is actually brand new, and this is one of the things that Trump is talking about when it comes to getting Mexico to pay for the wall. People don't understand the degree to which the Mexican economy is completely dependent on the United States economy, and one of the main ways is remittances. And you have people, whether they're in the country legally or illegally, from Mexico that send a lot of money back home. So remittances sent home from Mexicans working outside the country surpassed petroleum revenues in 2015 for the first time. There was a 4.75% increase in money sent from abroad, most of which comes from the U.S., to total $24.8 billion from last year, which is up from $23.6 billion in 2014. And that's according to the Bank of Mexico. So you have almost $25 billion being sent just from the U.S. to Mexico in the form of remittances. Someone working in the United States sends it back home to mom and dad, that type of thing. That's a massive subsidy to the Mexican economy, which, how much of that money is welfare payments? How much of that money is earned in the market working? Looking at the welfare numbers for illegal and legal Mexican immigrants, it's not everyone that's just outright working hard 16 hours a day. So a lot of money going back, and their economy is incredibly dependent on the U.S.
Which is an incentive as to why they send people. Like, why does Mexico facilitate the passage of illegal immigrants into America? Because those illegal immigrants sent money back to Mexico, which the Mexican government has become increasingly dependent on for its survival. And so the thing that you have to look at Mexico like it's Puerto Rico, which is a giant welfare state. Because what happens is, the illegal immigrants are taking welfare at the rate of 60% plus. And so you're being taxed, right? Like, if you're not in this particular demographic, you're being taxed so that money can go through the welfare state to the Mexican government, who then use it to fund more people to come into the country to go on welfare so that you can be taxed, so that they can, I think you get the general flow of money here. And the benefit of this, of course, to the native population, particularly the white population, is like, well, of course you'd want to stop that. I mean, how insane would it be otherwise? If there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women who are on the left, who are Hillary, then what other groups in society might at some point wake up, WASPs might wake up and suddenly say, gee, I wonder if we have a collective self-interest that we should pursue just like everyone else is doing. And I think if it shakes out that it's Bernie versus Donald, if it's Sanders versus Trump, I think the takers and the makers are going to be squaring off in a truly intergalactic cage match that may very well determine the future. And I say that knowing full well that I, in the past, have said that politics is nonsense and voting is nonsense. It may well be still. However, it's one thing to say to somebody who's swinging a yo-yo at a building saying, listen, you're not going to be able to knock that thing down. It's kind of another thing when a weirdly haired wrecking ball comes along and you actually have a chance. So I just wanted to sort of mention that. Again, I remain agnostic and on the fence, but there are so many new things in American politics when you have a lifelong, mostly free market guy facing a guy who's never had a job outside the public sector and who is an out-and-out bribocracy socialist. It's hard not to get interested when it's not one shade of gray versus another, but kind of black and white. I mean, for me, again, it's hard not to get interested in that.
Absolutely. And Donald Trump, one of the interesting things about him that people still don't seem to fully grasp and understand, the fact that he's completely unprecedented in American history by the fact he isn't taking campaign donations from lobbyists. And the fact that you have someone who's not doing that, that's actually successful and able to climb in the polls, that has never happened before and probably will never happen again. Someone with this amount of media experience, this amount of, frankly, bravery to talk about issues that the American people want to have discussed, that no one is willing to discuss because you'll be called a racist, you'll be called a sexist. I don't think there's a pejorative that could be thrown at Donald Trump that hasn't been thrown at Donald Trump. And he's going out there and he's taking these bullets to talk about these issues, whether you agree with his stance on them or not. His bravery in bringing this stuff up, I think, needs to be respected.
Yeah, he doesn't need to do any of this. I mean, he's got a pretty wife. He's got a seemingly nice family. He works with his kids. His children seem to like and respect him and don't seem to squirm out of his embrace like he's some sort of battering ram.
It's funny, too, someone whose standard of living will actually decrease by becoming president, as opposed to all these political wonks and hacks that, the only thing they do is run for office, or all the free market people. They talk about the virtues of the free market, but they haven't actually worked in the free market for 15 days to save their damn life. They're all in, protected licensed unions, or, they're working as policy advisors, or they're involved in some level of state or federal government. It's just like, I'd believe that you were actually a fan of the free market if you actually spent some time in it, as opposed to clinging to the government welfare teat with every fiber of your being.
Well, the idea that Donald Trump may be doing this because he genuinely cares about a country, wants to leave it more free for his kids and so on, I don't know. Nobody can be a mind reader, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. And it's just fascinating to see everybody, when someone comes along who may even remotely be idealistic, and he is, of course, taking on the toughest issues and changing the conversation of American politics significantly. The fact that he is doing this when it's costing him personally, financially, politically. He's not able to. He's abandoned his business, which he spent like 40 years building up. The fact that he may be doing this for somewhat idealistic reasons, I think, people were willing to extend that, and I think rightly so, to Ron Paul in many ways, to Rand Paul. But to Donald Trump, it just shows you just how cynical people have become about politics, at the idea that somebody might be idealistic. And he's not out there buying votes, as far as he said he's going to maintain the sort of Social Security and other of the entitlement programs and so on. But he's not out there saying, I'm going to give a whole bunch of people a whole bunch of specialized stuff, like Bernie Sanders is. Let's get money out of politics. I'm going to pay off your student loan. Well, which is it, Bernie? Can't figure out where you're coming from.
It's always amusing, too, when there's politicians that say, we're going to get rid of Social Security, or we're going to cut this entitlement or that entitlement. And they haven't accomplished anything of note, either in the free market or politically previous. It's like, I'm going to do this. I want a unicorn. I want a puppy. It's nice he's saying things. Yeah, he's saying things that a lot of people don't want to hear. And the fact that he's succeeding in politics, it means that, prior to Trump, politics, you're doing it wrong. If you actually sort of want to not serve your constituents, if you want to just set up your power base and all that, and of course, right. So I do think that this is a fascinating time in politics, and I guess we could just close off by talking about Rubio. Sorry, had to reboot there for a moment. That was an amazing moment. I mean, when he basically just you could see him, rebooting instantly, flash drive back into his 25-second memorized speech about Obama knows exactly what he's doing. He's trying to turn this country into the rest of the world. Can you pick up some milk? Obama knows exactly what he's doing. He wants to turn up. Hey, you just repeated yourself, right? Obama knows exactly. I mean, it's like, wow, what a weird place to go to. I mean, if somebody calls you out live for doing the canned speech, calls you out while you're doing the canned speech, don't do the canned speech again in the same debate. He did it 4 times, the same thing. And yes, all politicians repeat themselves, but man, he walked right into that one. And, Marco Rubio, whose biggest draw and attraction is, boy, he says things nicely and he looks purty. To just narrow it down, he shot himself in the foot in the last debate. It's not like he's running on legislative accomplishments or achievements, considering the only accomplishment he had as a senator is the Gang of Eight bill, which he's trying to distance himself from as much as possible because it strongly goes against the main topic that people want to talk about in this election season, which is immigration, and he wanted to provide a path to citizenship to everybody. So he's not running on legislative achievements, he's running on, I say things nice. And, he didn't say things very nicely in that debate, and Chris Christie, the lovable mobster politician that he is, completely eviscerated him, and just from a sheer political theater and entertainment standpoint, I gotta say that that was pretty amusing.
Well, it's funny because I haven't really, we did a show on the Bridgegate scandal, which I think is one of his big challenges in this election. I've never really thought that much about the guy, but I've never really warmed to him, but I kind of warmed to him in this. And I first thought I was warming to him because it's like, okay, this is the kind of guy who comes around and you better pay him $500 a month or something bad might happen to your restaurant. But I actually thought he was pretty powerful in that debate and casual. Now, his sort of trick of staring directly into your eyeballs and attempting to New Jersey his way into your soul is something that's a little habitual and repetitive, and it's tough. It's tough. I faced this in my own little way, just not wanting to repeat myself, because we've all known people in our lives who tell you the same jokes and the same stories, sometimes days or even less apart, without noticing it. It was really disconcerting. But I liked some of his spontaneity. Oh, there it is. There's that 25-second speech, and it's just like, Rubio, stop! Whatever you're doing, feign a heart attack, get an aneurysm, pretend to be demonically possessed, and then have Kasich fight it off for you with some incantation from the church. But do just whatever you're doing, please stop doing it right now, because what you're doing is you're showing people how you handle pressure. And for most people, I would imagine there's some pressure involved in being the leader of the free world and in charge of nukes. And boy, that was a pretty pivotal moment. And the fact is that he also didn't own it afterwards, but he kind of doubled down. He said, I'll keep saying it, and I'll say it more. You want me to say it now? I'll say it again. I'll make it your ringtone against your will, because I know the NSA people in the NSA. The fact that he didn't just say, wow, that was just a complete brain fart. I mean, that was not good, right? I mean,
you can say the same thing that he communicated, but say it, using different words. That is possible, and it might actually be helpful, because if you repeat it 4 times and people still don't get it, you might want to use different verbiage or explain it a different way or use a metaphor or something, try and illustrate the point and why you feel the point's important, as opposed to just sounding like a broken record. And to the point where you're being dubbed a robot and imploding your entire campaign.
And aren't there people showing up in robot suits outside his rallies now?
Yes, there are. And at the primary voting areas, people dressed in robot costumes. It's beautiful. Yeah,
that's a shame. I mean, that's a nicely shellacked half helmet hair that he's got going there. But
just think of all that lobbyist money that has gone into this, and then just poof, you might as well ignite it on fire. It's such a shame. Such a shame.
Well, and of course, now they also know his weak spots. And once you've shown that kind of smork belly flank to your opponents, they're going to have a whole lot of black arrows on top of towers.
Can you fathom? Because all the politicians repeat themselves. I mean, especially the ones that give tons of media. If you've heard Trump, I mean, he gives the same,
apparently America doesn't
back
win.
From China. Yeah, it's shocking. And you do have to do that if, people aren't hearing you on a regular basis. You do need to hit your points consistently. And that's something all politicians do. And now you're going to have Rubio, who's going to be incredibly self-conscious. Whenever he repeats himself, it's going to be, there it is again. They've completely neutered him. And just from, running effective political opposition in a completely amoral way, it's just fascinating to watch the ways in which various candidates have been neutered. Jeb Bush is low energy. So now he's, he tries to really fight back and be vigorous, and then he can be dismissed immediately with, look, you're showing more energy. It just completely eviscerates him then and there. Rubio now is a robot who, if he repeats himself, look, it's happening again, and it's completely dismissed. It's people are going to
be watching for it, and if he relies on repeated and memorized speeches a lot, then people are going to. And he knows the compilation clip is going to come up, even if it was like a speech 2 years ago where he used similar phrases. It's just, I mean, if they get in his head, right? This is a great challenge when you're any kind of public figure. You don't let people get in your head. You got to be spontaneous, think for yourself, and don't have the yammering masses in there running interference, because they'll GOP block you pretty quickly. Otherwise, GOP block. That's anyway. Okay, so last thing I wanted to mention, after that was this boy. Do most of the Republicans feel that they're in a Seth Rogen movie and that their main goal is to simply blow up North Korea? That seemed really, what would your response be to North Korea? And the guy's just like pushing a button like he's on Jeopardy and knows the answer, thinking it's something that's going to launch a nuke. They really did seem to want to blow up a whole lot of North Koreans. And the guy who didn't, there was a couple of people who didn't say that, but the main guy who didn't say that, who didn't say let's nuke, was Donald Trump. Of course, everyone's saying, would you give Donald Trump the nuclear codes, right? Although, of course, as I've mentioned before, it was a Democrat who actually dropped nukes in the past. But he said no. He said, let China deal with it. We've got most favored nation trading status with China. We've got a lot of leverage with them. They depend on us. And they have as much control over North Korea as we have over Puerto Rico. So they can go in and fix it. And if they don't, we can threaten trade sanctions and so on. So that is a pretty anti-war approach to the problem. I don't think that Donald Trump really got much credit for that, but it seemed like an imaginative and creative solution to a pretty thorny problem.
Yeah, the one thing you have to hold your nose during Republican debate about is all the, we want to make sand glow in the dark comments. Those are always wonderful. And, it was pretty distressing to see the degree to which people were interested in launching a preemptive attack on North Korea. It's like,
It's like Iraq never happened.
No, and, are the politicians' kids going to be the ones going over there and fighting these battles? And no, probably not. Not imagining it's going to happen. So that was pretty distressing, to put it mildly.
It is, yeah. And the female draft thing I've always found kind of interesting, because women are, in general, pretty bad at this stuff. They can't meet the physical requirements at 40% less upper body strength than men. And even when they can, they're subject to more depression, anxiety, and PTSD through
Suicide
combat.
rates as well.
Suicide rates very high. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, of course, that there are problems with sexual harassment and rape in the military that are not inconsiderable, which you don't get nearly as much, of course, with an all-male force. But it's interesting to me, and this sort of ties into the European situation just a little bit, which is that when people are reminded that only men are subject to the draft, it's a little hard to say equal pay for equal value, which, of course, has been the law in America for since the 1960s, I think. But equal death for equal genders is something that people have a real challenge with. I don't think it'll ever happen. The draft's not coming back anytime soon, I don't think. But the degree to which it might affect women would be pretty interesting. But there is, and this is what Phyllis Schlafly, of course, won in her opposition to the EPA, which was equal rights for men and women, equal responsibilities for men and women. She said, listen, this is going to subject women to the draft. And she kept hammering that point to the point where the EPA was failed to ratify after it first passed because a few states backed out. And that's fascinating. And this comes back to this comment that we had about what's going on when people would say, well, why didn't the European men defend the women against the Muslim grab bag of sexually inappropriate people in Cologne and other cities across Europe in New Year's Eve? 95% of Egyptian women report being sexually harassed. So, it is a kind of grabby culture, to put it mildly. And the question, of course, came back, which was, okay, well, if men are supposed to defend women, what special privileges do we get in return for that service? Right? Is everything equal except men have to then go and risk their lives to defend strange women? Okay, well, then everything isn't equal, because that's kind of a significant problem. And it's the same thing with the draft. Like, if only men are subject to the draft, okay, that's scarcely patriarchy. Then what special privileges do men get in return for being susceptible to the draft? But then you go down a whole rabbit hole of gender inequalities, and even fascinating to see that even the Republicans are blanching at that. Of course, I would say, of course, you shouldn't have. There's no successful army in the world that's ever had women on the front lines. It's ridiculous. But it's fascinating to see how far the Republicans have gone down the politically correct rabbit hole to the point where they can't even push back against that.
No, the one privilege that men get for being subjected to the draft is the privilege of being called misogynist. Yay. I'm not going to take that trade on average, but hey, it is what it is.
So are you going to keep watching, do you think?
You can't help but keep watching at this point. Whether or not you like any of the politicians, whether or not you're a Bernie Sanders fan or a Donald Trump fan, or you like Ted Cruz or whatever the deal is, what's happening right now is pretty important for the future of the United States and the world at large. The migrant crisis isn't going away. This is one of those things that a lot of people are going to find themselves on the wrong side of history about. The people that want to stick their head in the sand and go, everyone's exactly the same. There's no difference between cultures. IQ doesn't matter. Inbreeding doesn't matter. Yeah, there's a lot of people that just want to, everyone's exactly the same. They're an empty vessel that we can pour any amount of water into and it's going to, maintain whatever shape. It's not the reality of it. And, they're finding this out in Germany. They're finding this out in Sweden. And we're going to be finding this out in the United States as more and more refugees and more immigrants from backwards cultures, and just put it that way, come in, and there continues to be lots of problems. And, we'll see the degree to which people course correct and realize that they were wrong and, then apologize to those that they shout down for being racist or vile or, how dare you talk about these issues. This is pretty important stuff that's going to define, not only this election, but probably the next decade. And, being aware of where people stand and the information at large, incredibly important, incredibly relevant. And, if it does come down to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, talk about a swing. We know America's polarized as it stands currently. That's a bigger swing than I think anyone could have anticipated leading into this election cycle. Hillary was inevitable, and, Jeb Bush may be floating in there. They're pretty much the same person, just one wears a pantsuit. They're all taking money. They all support the same big corporate interests, but there's a different veneer on it. But Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump, which looks like it's a possibility now. Trump certainly seems at this point to be the front runner for the Republicans, and if he wins South Carolina upcoming this Saturday, it's going to be pretty difficult to stop him. And even though Bernie Sanders is not polling particularly well, in a lot of these places compared to Hillary Clinton. There is the sword of Damocles hanging over Hillary Clinton's head when it comes to this FBI investigation regarding her emails that could come down at any moment, whether or not they decide to prosecute her or not. The decision is ultimately going to be made by the FBI, and it's looking like there's going to be an indictment. The Attorney General, whether they prosecute her or not, it's going to have negative impact on her campaign. And her campaign is just a sinking ship right now. It's just, let's hang on to the people that supported me 8 years ago. Let's just, with grim death. And Bernie Sanders, just look at his rallies. I mean, whether or not, again, folks, whether or not you like Bernie Sanders, and I don't like Bernie Sanders, it's important to understand why Bernie Sanders is popular. And he's very popular right now. The fact that there's a lot of people very excited to come see this 70-year-old gray-haired man talk about socialism, it's very important. And understanding why that's the case and what that means for the culture at large is something you're going to want to do. So whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Bernie Sanders, whether it's Hillary Clinton's implosion, whether it's Ted Cruz doing whatever Ted Cruz is doing, whatever election he's going to steal next, this stuff is important to pay attention to because, this election is going to decide where the United States and the world goes. And is it going to fall into a place where we pretend all cultures are the same and then you lead to lots of problems? Lots more problems than you're going to get in the short term by, maybe closing your borders. Or are we going to pretend that climate change is the biggest threat that the world is facing at large and stick our head in the sand and ignore the realities of different cultures coming in and creating issues? So it's an important...
This is why, Hillary Clinton was, she lost everyone except people over 65 and people making more than $200,000 a year for reasons I can't possibly fathom and don't care to even research. But she was ridiculously unpopular, and this is why the fact that women are voting Bernie Sanders, the leftist women are voting Bernie Sanders rather than Hillary Clinton, is what prompted Gloria Steinem, when she was on Bill Maher, to say, well, but the girls are only going to Bernie Sanders rallies because that's where the boys are. This 81-year-old radical feminist is now saying what women just follow penises around and can't think for themselves when it comes to political matters. And that just goes to show you, nothing to do with caring about women. It's all about expanding the Marxist agenda. And hopefully feminism and the media will all be revealed to anybody with half a brain and one eyeball as a ridiculous series of manipulative leftists suck you into socialism, spit you out in body-riddled bullets, because that's what happens in socialism in the long run. I hope this stuff will get revealed, and that, to me, is the most interesting thing about this whole election cycle. But thanks a million,
One of the things, Seth, real quick,
go.
One of the things that people talk about is, Republicans being disenfranchised with the Republican establishment. You hear that a lot. That's pretty common. But what you don't hear is the fact that there's a lot of on-the-ground liberals that are very upset at the Democratic establishment as well, people like Hillary Clinton, which is why someone like Bernie Sanders, who is very much a radical compared to the establishment and is facing the same kind of opposition and pushback that Donald Trump is from the Republican establishment, the fact that he's popular just shows that everyone is very upset with the political process, status quo at large. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Hillary and Bernie moving forward. And right now, the next deal, Saturday, February 20th, the Democrats head to Nevada for their caucus, and the Republicans are heading to South Carolina for their next primary vote. So lots of delegates up for grabs there, and it does look like Trump is running away. I think he's got double-digit lead in Nevada currently, in South Carolina currently.
Sorry, Mike, to interrupt. You don't want to say that Trump is running away, because then Ted Cruz will say to all of his supporters that Trump has left the race. I'd say running ahead. We've got to be really careful before whatever might be picked up by Ted Cruz's people is very, very important.
Very important.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and Hillary is currently polling better than Bernie in Nevada, but we'll see. The fact that she barely eked by on a couple of coin tosses, 6 coin tosses. What a system, by the way. You
6 coin tosses, 1 in 3,100 chance. 6 coin tosses went her way to decide Iowa. Wow.
I understand if there's one district that is so disputed that you have to do the coin toss, but if there's 6 of them, wouldn't you then just equally distribute 3 and 3? Wouldn't that make the most sense? The Bernie Sanders people that are upset about this, they have every right to be. It just shows how farcical the political process is at times. But yeah, it's going to be curious to see, since she just sneaked by in Iowa, and the fact that she got her backside handed to her in New Hampshire, what impact that has on the upcoming Nevada caucuses for the Democrats. And if the Bernie freight train is going to keep moving forward, throwing free goodies out the window at every turn, or if Hillary Clinton is going to maintain her inevitable run to the Democratic nomination. We shall see.
We shall see, and we'll keep you posted. If you enjoy these chats, let us know in the comments below. We provide no sources whatsoever for our completely unsubstantiated opinions. But remember, freedomainradio.com/donate to help out the show. Or if you're doing some shopping, FDRURL.com/Amazon to help us out. And here endeth the political exploration from Free Domain Radio. Thanks, everyone, so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.